be consistently an issue for students today is executive functioning. And we'll just get started out with a real brief description of what executive functioning is. Because I find that this is a very kind of buzzy buzzword. A lot of people use it. Few people really know how to articulate what's going on. And executive functioning is these points, which even then we can condense this down to, does your student or even the adult in the house have difficulty making and executing upon their plans? So the steps that happen along the way are making the plans in the first place. I have so many students who feel like you ask them what they're doing in the next week, and the response that you get is, I'm writing an essay. And then it's silence, right? So we want to empower students to be able to break down plans into more actionable steps. Nothing makes me sadder than hearing a parent tell a student, go study. What does that mean, right? Everybody's got a different idea of what studying is and how to best complete it. So hopefully, my sincere hope is that through this, we can help bridge that communication gap between students and parents to know exactly how to articulate these things. So it's not just that you need to go study, right? That is technically your plan, but you want to know how to keep track of that plan. At what time are you beginning and ending studying? And while you are studying, are you just studying for 90 minutes straight, or are you building in breaks in between? Are you trying to keep track of more than one thing at a time? I think we all know the feeling of an essay being due in a certain class, and every other class falls by the wayside, right? And then we're constantly feel like we're spending the entire school year just leaping from one fire to another. So an important part of executive functioning is being able to keep track of more than one thing, in this case an assignment, at a time. We need to be able to meaningfully include past knowledge in discussions. This is a great one for me because I'm so passionate about students and parents having a better line of communication when it comes to not just what they're learning, but how they're learning in school. So if anyone wants to shoot in the chat, this would be a great time. What are some conversation starters or maybe some things you ask at dinner that you feel like have actually helped to bolster that conversation, to meaningfully include any sort of information that was learned during the school day? Does anyone have any great conversation starters that they like? While you guys are thinking about that, I will say the one that my dad used to use that I love. He hated the question, what did you learn in school today? Because he learned quickly that my sister and our patent answer was stuff. Right? So instead, my dad had this line that I still use with students. What questions did you ask today? Right? And I love that because it gets at the heart of not just what you understood, which we kind of take for granted, but what didn't you understand and how can we better move to tackle that topic together? Right? Because all executive functioning issues really on some level boil down to students and parents not knowing how to bridge that communication gap. So does anyone have a great conversation starter that they like? Maybe at the dinner table? I heard something at PTA today regarding X, and I was wondering if that was discussed in class. Did the teachers mention anything about that? Great, exactly. I love the fact that you're opening with an open-ended question. Just, did they mention anything about that? Now, what I find is this can also sometimes be met with, yes. And then we get that awkward silence. So to just even kind of tweak this a little bit, right? So just to tweak this a little bit, I love the just addendum of how did that make you feel, right? And you're still going to get some pushback from good, bad, nothing, right? But even just pushing with those questions, especially those feeling questions, because I find that gets nothing feels better than a student going, I hated it, right? And it's easy to cringe at that and just say like, well, they hated it. I feel like I stepped in something, but follow that because your student is giving you a strong emotional reaction. And that can be a great chance to find out why, right? Because they might say they hated it because they're uncomfortable talking about, I'll go broad, something like social justice issues, something that feels like a huge topic for a student of any age, and it made them uncomfortable, and they shut down. So you can reopen that conversation at home where it feels a little bit safer, right? The same
I
goes for, oh,
I love that. I love that. I was just going to say, I really connected to that because, my house, we have a couple of really big talkers and a couple of not so big talkers. So I think, a challenge in my house is always making sure that everyone has the speaking time, right? So just learning how to listen to each other and giving them an opportunity to get the words out and share something that happened, in the day. I think that's so helpful.
and it can be so interesting too, because though this talk might not necessarily show it, I was a really quiet kid. And one thing that my dad used to kind of coax me out of my shell is my face betrays me at all times. I can't hide anything. My expressions are completely an open book. So even just if you ask a student that question, if they give you a frown, if they give you a smile, if they give you anything, hey, it looks like you, facial expression. What was that for? Right? And that's a great way to take a student who's otherwise can be a little on the quieter side and just coax them out of their shell gently.
Right.
Let's see. Anything else in the Q&A? Okay. Cool. Then we have evaluate ideas and reflect on our work. This is something that I feel like everybody is incredibly difficult, especially after a test, quiz, speech, what have you, that didn't go well. It's so easy to start that conversation with, how did test go? How did speech go? And then you get bad, right? So rather than starting even with how did it go, you can have, hey, it seems like we worked a lot on this project. I was wondering if you feel like that effort paid off. Because then that gives you an answer of something like, no, it didn't pay off. Great, we can adapt our strategies for next time. Or, yes, it paid off. I learned A, B, and C, but topic D was half the test, which we'll get to later. That's a really important thing of just, I love that answer of this topic that we either did or did not study was either over or underrepresented on the test. Because that shouldn't happen. In a perfect world, that never happens, but we can arm ourselves with some tools to make sure that happens less often. We have a whole slide dedicated to that later, but does anyone have that experience where you say, hey, how did the test go? It went badly. This topic was just not on the test, or it was on the test way more than I thought it would be. And what do you guys do about that when that happens? Because it feels bad. But how do you actually actionably change that? Or do you feel like the conversation just dies at that point? While we wait for them to respond, Mary, do you have, I'm sure you've had that experience. What are some things that you do in your family to try and keep that? Oh, sure.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the question really is just, for the kids in the room, right? So you guys are going to be starting middle school soon. Maybe you're in middle school and you're going to have a test. And so you have a test and then you get feedback back after that test. So you get like a grade, or your teacher gives you some comments, and you come home and your parents say to you, how did it go? So Spencer's saying, well, instead of saying, how did it go? Maybe there's a different way to, frame that question just to get into some of this executive functioning, which is, we spent a lot of time on that. So do you feel like the time we spent actually paid off? Do you feel like the way you actually wrote that paper paid off? Or do you feel like that, that test, the way we studied for it actually worked? So that way, you and your parents can kind of get into the process a little bit more of the studying. So my Spencer's kind of asking, just, is there any time that you can think of so far that you have prepared for something and it hasn't really worked out the way you thought it would? If you have anything to share about that, right? Yeah. Is there anything? Yep. Conversation usually dies at that point. Listen, I think from a learning standpoint, that makes really good sense. Listen, if you're you're a kid and you're listening to this, like, just doesn't that make sense? Like, if you didn't do well on something, it feels kind of crummy, right? It feels like not great. And I think that a lot of times, like, our parents are definitely interested in us doing well, and we're interested in doing well, and our teachers want us to do well. And when we didn't do well, it feels kind of yucky, right? So what Spencer's saying is that if you don't lean into the yuck, if you don't really pay attention to the process that you just went under and that you did, and look at it and try to make it better, then you're never going to really improve, right? And so you and your parents could now have an opportunity in listening to this talk today to be on the same page, right? To think like, well, Mary and Spencer kind of said that when I get a bad grade, I should actually kind of look into this a little bit more and see how I could improve this. And the parent's going to say, hey, my kid just got a bad grade. I don't want to just say, how did you do? And leave it at that. Like, dig in more and be like, oh, what did we do here? Right? I mean, right, Spencer? I mean, that's actually my favorite stuff. Like, whenever I get with my students, I just set the tone right away and I say, hey, we're here to learn. It's totally cool. If you mess up, that's actually more juice for us to work with. Like, we can actually get in there and make this better, right? I don't know. Yeah. What do you think? What do you think, Spencer?
No, and that's always my point when working with students is, yes, I could give you 10,000 worksheets that are some variant of 2 + 2 is 4. 4 - 2 is 2, right? And you could get that right all day, every day. But if we're just focusing on perfection, you're not growing at all, right? And another way to approach that conversation that I think makes for a more active and engaged conversation is, hey, last night we studied fractions. And I think this will start to get to your question here, Kim, is last night we studied fractions. How much of the test was fractions? That way your student can say 100%. And you already know going into that they're probably going to feel pretty excited to answer. And if they go, well, only like 10% of the question were fractions, then you can just get to that point quickly and say, wow, that wasn't what we really studied. I'm sorry that went wrong. What can we do better in the future? You're already kind of heading that point off of they didn't do as well as they would have liked with a little bit of mind reading. Rather than starting with the grade, rather than even starting with just how did you feel, this is what we did, how much of it was applicable? And if you can get those two questions together, or those 2 points together, I find that makes for a much more engaging conversation.
Yeah, I love that. So guys, when you're looking at this worksheet that we sent along, on this slide are a bunch of different words that you can copy. You don't have to copy every single word on here, but if you want to think about the words planning or keeping track of time and finishing work, getting something done along with other things, learning new things and including the past knowledge. This is executive functioning. So if in that one box it says what is executive functioning, you could pick out maybe 3 or 4 of these areas that you feel you really understand and write them down there. You can have your parent help you. So what we'll do is maybe continue to talk a little bit about the last parts of this, but definitely just spend a few minutes doing this. Now, the other thing I'll tell you is that you'll get a video of this and these slides, so you can always come back to this. And I would really suggest that you do that, because there's a lot that we're packing in here in terms of information. Executive functioning is pretty complicated. So it's okay if it sort of feels that way, but we definitely want you to spend some time just writing down some of this information on your worksheet too.
Also, Kim, I'm not done with your question. We're coming back to it in a couple of slides.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Keep that in mind.
Great.
Great. So we have asking for help or to seek more information when we need it, right? this is where we're starting to kind of wrap back around to this, but there's more for you, Kim, here in a bit. Knowing when and how to ask for help is incredibly important. When I was growing up, had no idea how to ask for help. So I would just grind myself into a pulp trying to understand things, and it made me so skittish of any topic that I didn't grasp basically immediately, to the point that even though I was in a predominantly Spanish-speaking neighborhood when I grew up, and I had, in retrospect, a phenomenal Spanish teacher for several years, because I wasn't able to grasp it as quickly as something like math, I just ran from it. And it just made things more difficult. So we'll get back to that too. Engage in group dynamics. Great. So if you have executive functioning issues and you're struggling to engage in group dynamics, that makes a certain amount of sense when we tie everything in together, because you might have some anxieties around engaging in group dynamics, knowing when to even raise your hand and ask for help, right? So anytime we mention any of these single points, none of them are just going to be on their own. I've never seen a student who aces all 9 of these things but can't make plans, right? They're each going to be interwoven with each other, and we will hit all of them. Waiting to speak until we're called on. That's more, we're talking about impulse control, which again, makes engaging in group dynamics that much more difficult. Make mid-course corrections while talking, thinking, reading, and writing. So many students who have either impulse control issues, expressing themselves emotionally, or just issues with the topic at hand can have difficulty making mid-course corrections, because there's that worry that, and I imagine every parent here has heard this, why do I have to change my topic sentence? I'm 3/4 of the way done with the essay, right? Because as you're writing the essay, you learn that your topic sentence isn't really what you thought it would be, and it became something else as you were writing, which is part of the learning process. But for so many students, especially students who feel like learning or homework especially is simply punitive, something like this can be completely detrimental. So make sure as they're working on their work that you have enough emotional support for them to be able to understand that no, homework is not punitive. It's there to help reinforce what's hopefully learned during the day.
I think setting the climate. So, executive functioning, guys, happens here. If you're the kid in the room, you might want to just touch your forehead, or parents, you could do it too. I'm a pretty kinesthetic learner, so it makes a lot of sense. That's why this picture is here. All of this stuff is happening in this part of your brain. So the way it works is that your neurons are going to connect, and that's what allows you to make the plans and regulate yourself to be able to do all of these things. But you sometimes have to learn how to do these things, which is what we're going to get into now, so that your neurons know how to connect. That's actually pretty normal. So we're going to go to this.
So this is kind of a joke slide.
A little funny, yeah.
Right? How to know if your child has executive functioning issues. So this is genuinely, this is the list. This is as readable as I could make it while still getting everything on the page. These are all the criteria that professionals will use to diagnose if a child has executive functioning issues. If in the last 6 months, your child has experienced difficulty paying attention, done, executive functioning issues, right? So these can be so broad and so easy for any child to technically tick one of these boxes, that it's also nice to take a step back and think about the fact that everyone experiences this. In the past 6 months, has anyone not felt easily distracted learning at home?
Right.
Right? I'm here in my home. There's a desktop right here. I have my phone right here just in case. I have a Kindle right here. There's a million different things that are vying for my attention, and I'm the one that's speaking, right? Like, there's so much here that could distract. So I think it's important to just keep this in mind and know that we're all doing this. We're all feeling it.
We're all in it, yes.
Yes, and I hope that some of these tips and tricks will help. Cool. Much better. So let's get down to the actual nitty-gritty. So the things that, the basic things that we can pin executive functioning issues on are, do you have a difficulty with impulse control, right? In this moment, can I tolerate not doing something this instant and focus on work instead. Impulse control, not to sound too old man about it, but impulse control is especially difficult for students today, because why would I read a book for 2 hours straight? Think of how many, I feel ancient saying this, think of how many TikTok videos I could watch in that 2 hours, right? I almost said think of how many tweets I can read. I don't think anyone younger than me uses Twitter anymore, so probably more about TikTok. But I find that it helps to have some empathy there as a parent and just know that there are so many things competing for their attention. And so rather than demonize those things that are vying for their attention, try and understand where they're coming from. I've read a lot of amazing books in my life, and I've also watched, like, here's where I get to talk about when I was a kid. I've watched a lot of amazing vines, right? That for me was a great, like, just 10-minute escape. That was how I vented, was just laughing at a couple of things. And that was nice for me. But had I had those conversations, with my parents, their eyes would have crossed. How are you supposed to know what's going on in 6 seconds? It's too fast, right? That's a difficult conversation if you approach it with that negativity, but if you approach it with that understanding instead of, there's a lot of things vying for their attention, it can make that easier conversation to have. We also have emotional control. Can I handle the pressure of finishing an assignment on time? So I specifically said on time rather than can I finish an assignment to the highest standard, because I find that that's far more common. The real core of the issue is even when a student is striving with perfectionism, or struggling rather with perfectionism, what they're really doing is they're trying to figure out how to make the absolute best paper in a very narrow time window, right? Any student, no matter their level of perfection that they're seeking to achieve, they feel like they could do better if they had another day, right? So it's all about time management and if you can get things done under the wire. So if you do yourself a favor as parents and reframe some of that frustration with, is this really about like having not studied enough, or is this the difficulty with coping, Cam, as you asked earlier, is this the difficulty with coping with a perceived failure? How can I fail at something and not be myself a failure, right? That's really hard. And even in terms of emotional control with respect to something like this, I had this slideshow done and ready on Friday, and then I went over it with Mary yesterday. She had some notes, and I immediately freaked out. Because she asked for what are completely reasonable additions to this slideshow. But in my head, I immediately went to, but I was done. I was done, and now I'm not done. And even I had to have that moment of just like deep breath. This level of emotional uncomfort in that moment, at the end of the day, was not difficult to deal with, but it got on top of me immediately, right? We also have to think about planning and priority, which completely mixes with emotional control and impulse control. How are you able to plan for something in the future if that thing in the future scares you, right? Flexibility. Can you come to a meeting with Mary yesterday morning and be flexible enough to hear good feedback and be able to implement it in that microsecond? Absolutely not. I was not. But rather than, many things that students do, like getting mad at the person that gives them feedback or getting mad at themselves, getting whatever negative feeling is going on, I just wrote about it for a little bit. I never have a journal out, like I just reached over there. It's always here. If I'm feeling something that is totally uncomfortable and I can tell that it's distracting me, great, I'll just write about it for a little bit, right? Therapy is expensive. I have a journal.
How many of you guys who are the kids in the room have a journal like what Spencer is talking about? I know my mom also used to tell me all the time, like, just write it down. And sometimes I would not listen to her because whatever, she was my mom. And I'd be like, I'm not doing that. And then but truly, it is so interesting now that I've studied learning and I studied the brain so much that the act of getting the ideas out onto paper does release that cognitive load. So I put this little blue box in here because I want to get to it in a minute, but this idea of cognitive load, it's so fascinating. If you think about it, your brain is holding so much information at all times. And if you're worried about something, it's just going in a loop, in a loop, in a loop, in a loop, right? And it's taking up so much energy. So if you release it and you put it out on paper, then just that act actually frees up more brain space. So it's such a good tool. So the parents in the room, this is a great, and I find myself saying this to my own kids. I'm like, here's your book. Like, if you need to do it, just write it down. I don't know if they're going to do the same thing that I did with my mom, but I think it's a fantastic strategy. It's really great.
And if you want to sell students on it, if they're Harry Potter fans, I always tell students that that's my pensive. If anyone's a big Harry Potter fan here.
Very cool.
That immediately gets them on board rather than me saying, let's journal. They usually roll their eyes in that. But I go, no, this is my pensive. You've read Harry Potter, right? It's immediately like, it gets a little bit of credit, a little bit.
Totally.
We also have working memory, which again, to Mary's point, if you're overloaded on just about anything, and I actually did the research to back this up, it's part of the research that I did in college. If you are overloaded by any sort of emotional task, which we did by showing people scary movies, people who just watched a scary movie were much worse with their working memory. As easy as that. So if a student comes home from school and feels stressed, they're not going to learn as much. And then last but not least, organization. Do I know where my materials are? Pen, cup. Notebook, right? All in within reach. Calculate. Not even necessary for right now, but it's here. I know where it is. And for parents especially, because I find that so many of the parents that we work with at Evolved are incredibly busy professionals. And so the idea that you could take a full hour a day to really decompress and discuss everything with your students, it's not always going to happen. And I 100% sympathize with that. So easy things to just knock out are have a pencil cup, have a desk that is mostly clear of clutter, right? I have a few things on my desk that are fun tchotchkes, but for the most part, it is for work, right? Not that tchotchkes are necessarily a bad thing. Like I've got this, like it's cool to have something that you're proud of here. And this is just kind of my little, it's a Firefest token, if anyone remembers that. This was just a fun thing that I got from a sheriff's auction, but I think that's cool. And it's one thing on my desk that I can look at, chuckle at, and get back to work. I don't have 20 of those on my desk. A lot of students have, especially with like Funko Pops and a lot of things like that, I find that their desks are just piled high with stuff. One or two things, fantastic, go wild, but try and cap it.
Yeah, and it's true. There's actual research to that. Like if you go into Harvard Learning Center, they're doing research on just that, where they actually take students into spaces that are really cluttered, and they have to actually spend 5 minutes or so before they actually start working, cleaning up their desk area and everything. And then they, other students don't have to do that. And their productivity in that first group, where they actually had to spend time setting everything up, is much less than the students who are really, ready to work as soon as they sit down. So this also goes into my addition here for this slide, which is, real life connections, is just how many of you guys are in, maybe you want to put it in the chat just so I know what you're doing. How many of you this year are doing remote learning? How many of you are doing hybrid learning? How many of you are doing in-person learning? Maybe some of you don't know yet. That's okay. Maybe just put in the chat what you're doing. But essentially, when we're thinking about all of these areas, a lot of hybrids. Well, so here's what my definition of hybrid is. Hybrid is really, you have to be an expert at remote learning and in-person learning. That's really just what hybrid is. So, remote learning, we need to set your student up with an area to work. It needs to be clear. It needs to have the computer there. We need to know where the Zoom links are. We need to know how to use the mouse. We need to be able to access any materials really easily. So if there's a book that the teacher requires them to use, or something that, material wise, it needs to be all right there and organized. For middle school, we often have different teachers for different subjects. So my favorite thing to do is to get small bins for each subject, so that when the kids come home, they can just put the stuff in for each subject. So this is the science stuff, this is the English stuff, this is the history stuff, and this is the science, or what did I miss? Math, right? You want to be able to just like pull it out when it's class time, and not go finding it in your backpack, and not, spending that 5 minutes or so in the beginning, again, will cause you to be less productive, cause your brain to have to work harder. It's tiring. So in remote learning, you also want to make sure that you're employing some important pieces of this, right? You want to be regulated, meaning you don't want to have noise going on all around you, or other things that will zap at your attention. If your phone is near you, put it, on silent, so nobody's texting you and you're not getting game notifications the whole time. You also want to make sure that you have a planner, so you can record any assignments that you need to do, so you're not going to be falling behind in those regards, right? So these are things in remote learning that you want to have. If you're in-person learning, just remember that you're going into school, you're going to be wearing a face mask, you're going to be sitting at a desk, and you're not moving around anywhere. So it's hard because you have to regulate your body. Your emotional control piece of executive functioning is at play now. So you've got to be able to sit, you've got to be able to attend, and now you've got to be a little bit tricky in how you actually stay active. So you might need to write. I told kids before, like if you're in a class and it's just stuff you already know, or you're covering review material and you already know it and you're starting to get dysregulated, write down what the teacher's saying, write down your observations that you're seeing in the room, write down questions that you have, write down what you wish was being covered. Whatever helps you to kind of be engaged is going to be helpful. Writing is a really active way to learn. So you can do that. So try, if you're in your home and you're going to have a break, try to do things that don't add to your cognitive load. You want to give your brain a break. So don't be, for example, going on your phone, because this is still activating your brain in the same way that you're learning. Don't go on video games. Don't do the things that are going to really like charge up your brain. You want to give your brain a restoration. So go talk to somebody in your house, go on a walk around the block, go, shoot your basketball into your hamper, do a dance to some song that you like, try to engage other parts of your body as opposed to your brain. Like give your brain a real break. That's really, I think, a very, very important part about breaks right now. Any questions about, how you can be better at executive functioning with regard to remote or hybrid or in-person? Just put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. I'll definitely address them. The other thing I've also noticed is just in this whole thing that Spencer was talking about, a lot of families are needing to organize differently for the different systems. So if you're going to school, your morning routine is different than if you're going to remote. And this is a lot, again, of this cognitive load, because your whole body has to prep for that experience each time. If you're just in a routine, it's easy, it's less cognitive load. So try to routinize the things that you're doing. Try to go in an order every time, the same time. Try to put things up on a whiteboard so it's right there and everyone can see. Like, we're going to, to school today. You guys need to get this, this, and this, and this, and this done. Leave it there, right? Let them kind of look at it. Then it's out of your cognitive load, so you can regulate. I have 3 kids in 3 schools, and I tend to write a lot on the whiteboard. And then if the kids start asking me, I go, look there and don't ask me. You're just regulating me. I need to have my own brain right now. Like, that's the language I use. So I hope that helps, but I would love to learn any other, any other questions. Okay, so here's a great question. while doing hybrid but learning on remote days, how do you help the kids find a brain break when they're not disturbing the siblings or the parents? So I would actually not give them ideas. I would give your kid the problem to solve. So I love the words negotiable and non-negotiable. I use them a lot. I totally stole this from someone else. But basically, negotiable is the things that you don't really mind if your kids are like going to pick. They're going to make their choices. But non-negotiable are the things that like you can't budge on. So with your kid, you go to your kid, listen, you're going to have a break. Non-negotiable, you can't make noise and you cannot be on your phone and you can't do video games because it's not good for your brain. So that's why we're not doing that. But you can't make noise because the kids are going to be, everyone's going to be working. So negotiable is what you do. So let's make a list of what we do. And you could, create just a blank sheet of paper, some ideas. I don't know. I feel like my kids would probably do Legos. They would do, they would walk around the block. The teenager, like walk around the block, go on the phone and talk to somebody, which is really different than playing a video game. They could go sit in and do some, arts and crafts kinds of things, but maybe they have to come up with their own ideas. I think it's always better when you just present the problem, especially at this age. They have all of the middle school kids. I think you guys understand me when I say, and I taught middle school for years, so I really understand the age group. It's like, they have a lot of ideas. They're not my ideas, but they're their ideas, and there's no lack of them. Right, Spencer? I don't know.
Sure, of course. Yeah, I love when they're trying to come up with something that doesn't increase cognitive load. Any sort of tactile skill tends to be great. Like for no real reason, I know how to juggle. I know how to use a Chinese yo-yo. I know how to pick a lock. I'm not using these in my day-to-day life, but just to have it, I know how to solve a Rubik's Cube. Like any sort of good, like productive fidget toy tends to be great. You also mentioned something too that I wanted to bring up. Since many students are going to be either hybrid or remote this year, a pair of headphones that actually have noise canceling abilities. These are like $25 on Amazon, and they just have a little switch right here. It turns on and they blast like 30 decibel white noise on top of whatever you're listening to. Boy, has that been a godsend. Because I live in a relatively small apartment with Meredith, who is herself a teacher, and we need not drive each other crazy. And the easiest thing has just been white noise headphones. We can talk at a reasonable level and not hear a thing each other is saying. So cannot recommend those enough.
That's really great. Yeah, there's a lot of really good tools. I don't know if anybody else has any other tools or tricks. I just feel like, it's all about sharing ideas as well. So you can just throw them in the chat. I'll throw them out. If anything has worked for your family, I know we're all sort of learning on the job right now. So anything would be helpful. But these are some other awesome tips. And we're gonna get into, we have about another 20 minutes or so of content. So we're gonna kind of more quickly go through these next couple of slides, which are really the juicy ideas for you. I like to call them ideas because they're things you can do. So these are some ways that you can help yourself with any of these areas, right, Spencer? You can walk us through this perhaps in a couple of minutes, and then I want to get to the other ones too.
Yeah, this can be super quick. This can be something that you all just screenshot. I just wanted to post as many different small ideas as possible. So organizing, make sure you have your calendar, your whiteboard. I love sticky notes because I also like to organize my sticky notes in terms of what's important. So I have the most important on top, least important on bottom. So that I don't know how I could use my brain without it. Simplifying. This is one that I just actually got from a student a couple weeks ago. And no matter what the directions are, he just rewrites them in the way that he would say it. That's it. And it's the most simple thing, and it's great because it also lets me as a tutor know if he doesn't have a piece of the directions. So he gets to understand the directions better, and he's able to then communicate with others whether he understands the directions. It takes 2 seconds, and it is incredibly useful for that communication piece. Planning, setting daily goals for each subject. I didn't write this on the slide, but I wanted to still point it out. Make sure you have SMART goals. SMART goals are ones that are specific, measurable, assignable, relevant, and time-based. I got all 5. Yes. So as you're writing down goals, they have to hit all 5 of those things. Otherwise, they probably won't get done, right? Everybody has talked about losing weight since lockdown began, present company included, but I have not been diligent about, actually making them specific. What does losing weight mean, right? I want to lose 10 pounds. Measurable. There we go, 10 pounds, 10. Assignable. What can I be doing each and every day to help me actually make measurable growth?
Yeah.
Relevance. If I'm trying to lose weight, why am I tying in, juggling, for example, into that? It's not exercise. It's just something that I'd like to be doing every day. Then time-based. Great. I'm going to do a half hour of exercise every day. Right? If I set some sort of goal like that, rather than just, I'm going to lose weight, one of those is going to happen. Attainable.
Attainable. That's the one. Yeah.
Fantastic. Then we have, real quick, monitoring. You really can't monitor something unless you have those SMART goals. So those really go hand in hand. So make sure you have an ability to actually check things off. This one is so nice because I feel like it's one of the most underutilized things is actually rehearsing and practicing social situations. I feel like probably 10% of my job is just role playing. Okay, I'm a teacher. What are you going to say to me? Right? And students, I find that anxiety just melts away as soon as they have that first practice run. Hey, I really didn't understand this assignment. Great, how can I help you? Even that 2-second interaction can bring that anxiety level just crashing down. Having consistent start times speaks for itself. Have timers. Use your GCal or iCal, whichever you prefer, but there's no reason not to have actual blocked out time for different activities. It just makes your mental load, or your cognitive load rather, sink to nothing. It's great. Discussing priorities. Make sure that with the sticky notes arranged vertically, you have something like that. And then last but not least, since we're talking about timers also, I don't know if anyone has ever used it, but the Productivity Owl is a great extension for both Google Chrome and Firefox. And all it is a little test that sits in the corner of your screen. And if you're slacking off for too long, it just closes the tab. That's it. There's no negotiating with a Productivity Owl. And so it could be kind of nice too, because it can be that thing where you've been working for 15 minutes. You just want to look at something for 15 seconds to see did I forget to do X, Y, or Z? You look at it and then tab automatically closes rather than going, well, while I'm here, while I'm on Twitter, I might as well. That conversation just doesn't happen. Productivity Owl. Highly recommend. Excellent. How to study.
There's a note on the worksheet on this one. Yep. All right.
Over budget all your time. This is the thing that Microsoft actually started doing in the early 90s, and Bill Gates said that it was the #1 thing that could be attributed to their corporate success, is their managers, just as a flat rule, over budget every single deadline they receive from their coders by 20%. It doesn't matter how long the coder's been working there, it doesn't matter, because that 20% is a beautiful fuzz time. You give yourself an hour and a half to write the paper, and if you finish in an hour 10, you're free. You can get to run, right? And so it's a really pleasant surprise because no matter what happens, you're always done early, or you finish right on time. There's never going to be that stress if you can intelligently budget your time. So if you have a student that says they're going to finish an assignment in an hour, budget them at an hour 20, and then let them be excited when they're consistently finishing ahead of schedule. Those little tiny victories add up. Make sure you organize your space. Already talked about this. If you really want to go bananas with this, you can do the thing that some people do on their tool benches where they actually have tape to outline where things should go. Mm-hmm. So if you have a particularly disorganized student, that can be really helpful because there's not a guess. They know, oh, my pen cup goes exactly right here because there's a nice little circle on the table.
Oh, I love that.
Flowcharts. Love flowcharts. Zenflowchart.com. It's the only one I use. It's free. Old exams. grab old exams from your teacher. Your teacher has them. They're not hoarding them. They're not some goblin. They have them. If they don't have them or they're having difficulty getting them, just go straight to the department head. They have those exams ready and waiting. There should be no mysteries. There should be no guessing. There should be no, I didn't realize X, Y, or Z would be on the exam. Teachers are on your team. Explain concepts aloud. So rather than just studying and keeping things quiet, at the end of a study session, instead of just going over the same flashcards that your students have already done, my favorite study routine is to say to my student, pretend I'm a smart 7-year-old. Can you explain this concept to me if I were a smart 7-year-old? If they can't, they haven't studied hard enough, right? They should be able to repeat whatever concepts they're studying in their own voice at a low enough level that anyone could understand it. Get in the study group. Get in the study group yesterday. For no matter what class, if you are worried that there will be any difficulty, students shouldn't have to face this alone. Make sure they have the social support that's so, so important with study groups. And last but not least, make sure you build in breaks. Mary actually turned me on to this, the Pomodoro technique, which is just 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, totally unstructured. Just do whatever the heck you want for 5 minutes, come back in 25 minutes. And that on-off working and not working schedule is great. It's not very stressful at all, which has always been a problem for me.
So make sure if you're doing the worksheet, just write down something you definitely want to grab onto and hold on to and try out. If you take a minute and jot that down, that would be great. I love the Pomodoro technique because it goes into my whole realization of the cognitive load. So anything I can do to upfront, my studying, if I have to work on something really hard or research something or plan something, I do it for 20 minutes and then I take a 5-minute just listening to something like a podcast. That's kind of my jam. I'll do that. It helps so much. It's amazing, but it really does. And, for studying, guys, the other thing that I would say is just that this study group concept is kind of, I don't know, I think a lot of people are not necessarily inclined to promote kids to join together to actually study together. I don't know if it's just that everyone's going in 10 different directions. Now we're in a pandemic, everyone's separated. But certainly if there's a science test coming up, a really great way to study is to get together and just start talking with your friends about the different concepts that you have to learn. Because if you say it to your friends, you're processing, you're learning, and your friend says it to you, you're hearing it. So there is an advantage to this stuff. Now, of course, if we get into conversations about other things like what's on Netflix or who's on TikTok or whatever is happening, and we're not studying, that's not going to be a great use of your time, right? But certainly it's a great way to study. And I think a lot of kids, get away from that a little bit, which is, I'm trying to bring that back into a lot of my coaching work with families. Like, let's try to get these kids supported because, it's really awful to study by yourself. And it's really actually unreasonable for a lot of 6th to 8th graders to just go in a room and study themselves. That's a really hard thing to do because there's so much executive functioning that has to happen for someone to do that. So the more support and social connection we can give kids and families around this experience of learning some material and studying it and memorizing it, acquiring it, so to speak, it's important. So maybe you can jot down something you've learned here. All right.
Start your study group now before the school year starts and people's schedules get crazy.
Yeah, right. Do it now. Yeah, like Friday afternoon study group. Exactly.
Done.
So I'll take this one. Is that all right, Spencer?
Go for it.
Cool. All right. Just a couple minutes because writing is actually really executive functioning heavy. There's a lot of executive functioning that goes into writing. So many times students have to write more in middle school. They need to be able to bring in a higher level of thinking, analyzing, things like that. So it is something that you need to kind of have a process for. So what I want kids to take away today is that if you could just work through these steps as you write, you are going to slowly find success as you improve. So understand the prompt, brainstorm your ideas, go back to that text, underline, find the answers there, find the evidence. Then organize your ideas. So you can take that brainstorm list and you can just number like the order in which you're going to say things, or you could rewrite it into a formal outline. Although I know a lot of kids are not into that because it's more work, but certainly the more you can do in the first 3 steps, that's going to lessen your cognitive load later. Remember, I introduced that term to you. So if you organize stuff and get your ideas out, when you go to actually write things down, your brain isn't doing number 1, 2, and 3 while you're trying to write. That's what's so hard. And a lot of times kids just want to sit down and like get it done. And then it's a miserable experience. And most of the time that's why, is that you're not breaking it up into different parts. I also wouldn't write and organize all in the same 20 minutes. I would do a session of understanding the prompt. Then I would do a session of brainstorming my ideas. I might even organize at that session, but then writing is another session. Revising is another session. Sometimes revising is 4 sessions and then editing is your last part. So try to break things up. And like Spencer was saying, if you have an essay to write, you might want to go into your GCal with your parents and actually schedule in, like, when are you going to work on understanding the prompt? When are you going to work on brainstorming? When are you going to work on actually writing? Put it all in your calendar. I don't have a to-do list. It's all in my calendar. Because if it doesn't go in my calendar, it's not getting done. And I know a lot of my high school kids, that's how I coach them. I say, you must have everything on your calendar. But, you know, for a middle school kid, sometimes you're using a planner and you're using a calendar. You're starting to use a calendar. So there's a little bit of flexibility there, in my opinion. But certainly try to make sure you allot a lot of time for this. All right, we got 2 more slides here, guys. You're almost there, and then you're just gonna be armed with so much good stuff. I just love it. All right, go ahead. So communicating with teachers. Yes.
Communicating with teachers. I find that even parents have a certain level of stress when it comes to communicating with teachers. They're on your team. Meredith, she's right over there. She tried to barge in earlier. She's a teacher. She's one of the nicest human beings I've ever met. They're on your side. 100% of the time. I really don't think I have ever met a teacher who is truly there to just make children miserable. But we've all had that teacher that we think of as being terrible, who somehow poisons the well for everyone else. Communicate early and often. They're human beings, right? They're not going to know your name right away, so you do need to help them with that. And in that exchange, you can help introduce some things that help you to stand out, and then also some areas in which you're feeling as if you might be a little nervous about the class that's coming up. Stick to the important stuff. Your teachers are so busy. They're so busy. Meredith, no joke, gets an average of between calls, texts, and emails, about 20 of some number of those communications a day. So I like to just stick to the 1-line method for emails. Try and get your email to just 1 line. If you can do that, 100% response rate, basically guaranteed. Avoid subjective language. So this goes not only for dealing with your teachers, but also in a second here, we'll get to talking to your students. Try to remove "I don't get this" or "I don't understand, this doesn't make sense," anything like that from your vocabulary. If you can get down to more precise language, I'm having trouble with page 85, problem number 4, right? That way your teacher can give you in 1 email rather than 5 to try to figure out what the heck you're saying. The faster they can help you, the faster they will help you. They're on your team. Notice the good stuff. Teachers, being human beings who love compliments, they also love to hear what's working. And the more you can communicate to teachers what's working, the more they can keep teaching to that style, right? Most of teachers' inboxes is at least like a third or more complaints. So having some kind things to say also does help you float to the top. You don't need to kiss too much butt, but you can just help to make the day a little bit better. And as always, be professional and courteous, right? Teachers are professionals. They're not your friend, but they are on your team, right? You can still be friendly. You can still do as much as you want to communicate with them. Just make sure you're being considerate, especially when you're sending things. I have noticed that a lot of parents like to send things at 9 o'clock the previous night and then wonder why they haven't been responded to in the morning, which I get there's that temptation, but Google, if you're using Gmail, they do have a button that allows you to send emails at a scheduled time. So if you can be the first person in their inbox in the morning rather than the person that sent them an email at 11 o'clock at night, I'm going to guess that they're much more likely to answer that 8:30 email than they are to answer the 12:30 at night email. Just an idea.
That's right.
So just kind of burning through this now. So that's communicating with your teachers. Basically, all the same rules apply when communicating with your child, right? It's the start of the school year. This is a chance for everyone to start off correctly, right? We still want to do all these important things like avoiding subjective language, right? That goes back to initially one of the conversation that we started with essentially was rather than you're struggling in school, hey, I noticed that the last vocab quiz you got an 81 versus usual 90-ish. How can I help next time? Right? And you can immediately knock down some of that frustration. See, Kim, I told you to come back to it. You can immediately knock down some of that frustration if you just say, I'm going to call the ball. I see that it is less than you probably wanted. Let's work together. Right? Notice the good stuff. Compliments are free. Kids love them. Everybody loves them. Right? And I know it's kind of a joke, but yeah, you can definitely have a time of day, especially when you're using calendars. The rule that Meredith and I have agreed to is no work talk after 8 p.m. It's not allowed. Can't do it. Right? And so if you have that line in the sand for students and parents, can also be a great relief. Right? Students don't have to worry about, well, when's that homework assignment going to be done? 20 minutes before they're trying to go to bed. Whew. All right. And then last but not least, make sure you reward your child for progress, not perfection. You can use word calendars, and then just remember rewards, not bribes. It's an important one. And we'll have it attached as a PDF to an email tomorrow. But I came up with 51 different ways that you can reward your students. So there's even just my brainstorm came up with a billion different ideas. Make sure to share that with them.
Yeah. I think it's a great parenting technique is, one of the things I teach is in my own home is that if you meet your responsibilities, then you get to earn privileges. And I think adults have this too, right? We all have responsibilities and then we get to have certain privileges if we meet them. So it's a concept, right? And so if we're all meeting our responsibilities, then we can certainly enjoy A, B, or C, or D, or whatever these ideas are. So I just, I love the idea. My doorbell rings and everyone's coming home.